So now what we want to do, and we haven't done it for a while, is talk about Florida tax deeds, and go look at some upcoming auctions in Florida.
Yeah, Florida has always been, I think, one of the best states out there in terms of how they operate their tax sales, how they advertise them, and what the opportunities are, the county records. They've just been leading the country, I think, in how they do things. At least ever since we've been involved with tax sales, they were the first ones to go online with a lot of stuff. Now, they're unique in that Florida doesn't fall into just one category. They're a state that utilizes a tax lien system, and they also utilize a tax deed system. So they use both. They have an annual auction in May in which they sell their tax liens every year. But then throughout the year, those liens are being foreclosed on by lien holders, taking them through a tax deed application process that is filling up tax deed auctions that happen throughout the year. So there are always Florida tax deed auctions that are happening. They also have their foreclosure auctions that happen in all of these counties as well. Most of the counties will separate the foreclosures, though, from their tax sale properties. So, Florida liens are sold with a 2-year redemption period and a maximum rate of return of 18% annually. So you can basically bid down your interest rate, though, in trying to win the lien. But any lien that doesn't redeem after 2 years can be foreclosed on by filling out a tax deed application.
And tax lien auctions are going to be taking place, or who's going to conduct those auctions are going to be the tax collector, and the tax deed auctions are going to be held by the clerk of the court. So with the tax lien certificates, like Shay talked about, they're going to be bidding down the interest rate, and with the tax deeds, they're going to be used premium bid starting at the back tax lien. So all of those tax liens combined, that's going to be what the opening bid is. Now, the last thing to remember is that many of these counties have moved online. So a majority of the tax lien auctions are held online, and a majority of the tax deed auctions are held online as well. So for online investors, Florida is one of the best states to invest into. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and look into some Florida auctions.
All right, what we're looking at here are the scheduled opportunities here in April in Florida. We have the bank foreclosures here in blue. We have the tax sale foreclosures here in orange. Let's just enlarge that a little bit here. So if we're looking at some of the properties here, they're coming up for auction. We have a lot of opportunities here. There's still about, what do we see, 21 properties here in this sale, and a number of opportunities we can review. Now, if we see properties where the opening bid is really high, we know those are probably going to be properties that have some kind of homestead exemption, although sometimes that doesn't necessarily change the numbers. We've seen properties where they can still be good deals, even with the higher opening bid amount, but that's something we can kind of acknowledge or see versus some of these other properties where the opening bid amount is quite a bit lower. Now, let's pull up this first property here.
Yeah, in fact, that was something we didn't mention about Florida, is that with the tax deed auctions, the one exception to starting at the opening bid amount is going to be a homestead property. And so if it does have this homestead exemption, then it's going to start at 50% of the assessed value in addition to the property taxes. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the market value, what they're setting at the assessed value, is going to be the market value.
So homestead properties are always going to be owner occupied. That's one of the requirements, is they have to occupy the property that they get the exemptions on. But what homestead exemptions are, though, is essentially they're tax exemptions that they can qualify or apply for. And some of those things, meaning that, like, for instance, that they it's an owner occupied property here, and things they can do to help reduce the tax load. So one of the ways that we can see that is if we go into something like here, they actually have nice information here which shows their exemptions that helps us understand that. So they do have all the exemptions here, which we can see. There's one called Save Our Homes Cab here. Then there's a homestead, and then there's a second homestead exemption. And what it does is it reduces the taxable value of their property. So they have kind of all these things working together to help reduce the value of their property about $100,000 a year or so, roughly.
Yeah, exactly. So it's pretty easy to see which properties are going to have the homestead exemption. Now, we just talked about tax lien certificates. That may be something to look into and at least think about if you're buying a tax lien on a homestead property. You might even be able to get a higher interest rate, but you will need to remember that that opening bid is going to start higher based on that. Now, you're not going to have to pay that. You're just going to pay the normal tax liens, but that is going to be one of the results of bidding on a tax lien on a homestead property.
Yeah. Now, in terms of values, we could look at, I don't know if this property is necessarily, the condos are probably relatively close, or at least closer. Sometimes they can be, but we'll pull it up here real quick. And there we go. And the unit that we're looking at here, I think, is unit number 1606 is going to be the number. And so let's pull up and look at a value here on it.
You can see where they've got some of the numbers. Sometimes you can go in there and kind of type in the number like Shade is doing, and it'll pull up the correct property.
I think it's us right there, 1604. Holy cow, is that right? No, 1606. All right, hold on here. Let me go back here. That must be like a penthouse or something here.
It's 2-bedroom, 2-bath. We'll have to see how much they've got this one valued at. That's a 1-bedroom, 2-bath.
Yeah, so a smaller unit here, we can see it valued at 772. So still higher than what they're claiming it at the 603. But then I guess as far as the deal though, even then they bought it for less than half of value, or about half of value is roughly about what they paid. So not a bad deal, and probably a lot better deal than you could get on the open market or trying to buy it any other way. That's not a bad deal.
Yeah, and we'll see it come up here to the auctions. It'll be interesting to see what it actually sells for. But starting out at that price, that still could make a lot of sense, even though that is a homestead property. And something like that, like a condo, we're going to eliminate a lot of risk. We're going to eliminate, like things like the roof condition or the foundation. Really, we're just looking at the interior of the property. In fact, we've even got photos that we can see of inside back the last time this property sold. So there's only so much damage that can be done. We're still going to need to rehab it, or we still may need to, but it's not the same type of risk as if it was just a regular structure or home.
And it looks like it was listed last in 2025. So about a year ago is about when it was listed last. And so, yeah, I think there's definitely opportunities with a property like that.
Interested in tax sale investing? Become a member of taxsalesupport.com to learn how.
You can also look at properties right down below it. We can see ones where they obviously don't have that same exemption because they're opening up for about 10% of what they say the assessed value is. And if we can click on it here, we can see what the property is based on the record. And interesting enough, this one is actually another condo, but it's just a condo that doesn't have that homestead exemption like we saw before. Now, what's interesting, if we look at it, we can see that the mailing address is another condo. It's just in a slightly different address, maybe a different building, I think is what it is. But it's another condo. We can see, so the property address here on this one is 465. The mailing address, so it's property address is 465 Brickell. Mailing address is 485 Brickell in a separate unit. And if we go down here and look, under here, we can see the non-homestead cap that's there. We don't see any of those other things that are listed there, which is why it's opening up at a very, a lower percentage of value here, or at about 10% of value at 38,000.
Yeah, and that opening bid is any of the tax liens that were issued on this. Maybe it's 2 years, maybe it's 3 years. We could go back and look, because after 2 years, whoever starts the foreclosure process first is going to be the one that essentially sends it to the deed sale, and they're going to need to pay off any of those other tax liens that are issued, their money and their interest, so that it ends up going to the deed sale. So you're kind of the only one that owes taxes on it, but you'll be earning an 18% return during that time between when you start the tax deed application and pay those other tax liens, and until it goes to auction. So for a period of time there, you're going to be making the maximum return on any of the tax liens that you purchased.
Oh, interesting. And so we can actually see, you know, how much has been paid here at different points. And that amount due right there for 20, that's probably from last year's bill. This is probably, of course, we also have 2022 here. It was listed here as, well, that's the full bill amount, but it doesn't show as unpaid.
Yeah, well, you can see that 2022, I think, is it. That 2025, I wonder if that's kind of future owed or not, because doesn't it start about 32,000?
Yeah, yeah.
So
It's
it's just the 2022 auctions, 38,000.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Yeah, just looking at this. So what it looks like is we can see where the property taxes were paid up until about 2021. That's the last year that they were paid. And then nothing's been paid since 2021. So like we were saying before, you know, you can have up to 7 years that will survive in Florida. And so what that means is with all of these that have not been paid yet, we can actually see, so here's one of the liens right here, and we can see the interest rate that it's, you know, that it's out there and earning right now. You know, there's a lien from you can see it was earning 0.25% here, and the face amount was $6,800. But then when that actually got paid though, nothing else since then has been paid. So there's $32,000 that listed right here. It's kind of set up as the annual bill, and there's $8,000 that's owed up here, but I don't see any other liens that have been issued per se. And so I don't know whether those are outstanding or active, but in any case, you have at least 4 years worth of taxes that haven't been paid on this property. And maybe that's the total amount that we see there that they have. Maybe that is all the roll up there's the 32,000 up to that point, plus maybe another 8,000.
I think it may have been the taxing certificate holder from 2022 that could have paid off the other debts.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah, in order to, yep, that's right, to push the issue here. So that's what's sending the property to auction. So now it's going to get paid off, and either they're going to get their you know, they're going to get paid back their money plus their interest, or the property could be lost, which most likely it'll end up being paid off so they don't lose it. But if they did, yeah, they would certainly lose it here. It hasn't had its property taxes paid in a long time.
Yeah. Well, in a property like this, you know, there's advantages and there's obviously disadvantages to purchasing condos. But one of the big advantages is that, you know, that we're just really worrying about the interior of the property. And if there was something majorly wrong, you know, there would probably be information about that. So the only real risk is making sure that we're working with a good HOA or condo association. So we'll give them a call. We'll find out everything we can about the property. We'll tell them that we're interested, and we'll try to see if we can get in good with them before we actually buy the property in any type of condo situation.
Yeah, it's a good point. And it's different from when we deal with a property like for let's say this one here that starts at 21,000. It says it's valued at 187. What exactly is it? Well, if we look at it here, it is a single family house that we're looking at. Here's the property address. It's not owner occupied. We can see, you know, the owner or the mailing address is somewhere else there in Miami. If we're looking at it, it's a pretty simple little house, like a 2-bedroom, 1-bath. If we were to look at what it looks like here, let me just pull it up here. And here is the image of it. So if we're looking at it overhead, there's the same property here. And from the front, it looks like this. Now I love properties like this because we look at it and it's a property that somebody's already gone through and done a rehab on. You know, so we can see that because it has things like new windows, you know, those are vinyl windows on it, which probably are, it's probably not a new property. So I'm sure these were added. You know, the roof looks like it's new. You know, everything is there, including, you know, the stucco looks good. You know, the soft fascia, you know, it's fenced off here. You know, all those things are great. You know, I mean, it's in Miami. That's another thing I guess a lot of people are going to be looking for here.
One thing that's interesting about that, though, is if you were looking there at the grass looks like it's been uncut for at least a little bit. So, you know, this is back in 2025, so it could still be occupied, but that's kind of, you know, that's just kind of something I noticed, that even though everything looks good, it does look like the grass has been a little uncut. Now that doesn't necessarily mean anything. Maybe they just went a few weeks. But as we, we're looking for any clues on the property that could tell us more about if it's currently being lived in. If we could see garbage cans or anything like that, that can sometimes help.
Yeah, we can get an idea here. The value on it's, quite a bit higher than what they're estimating there at 180, more like 390 is about what they're putting it, which is, it shows you that there's plenty of room bidding with these properties here to bid up, and we'll see what they go for. Ultimately bidding, but a property like that could be worth bidding up. It's been fixed up enough that I would treat it a little bit more like a newer property than I would probably quite like an old property.
Yeah, it's in pretty good shape.
So we have a couple more here we can take a look at. Let's pull up. And this one's another condo. It's kind of like the other one here that we're looking at. Now, another thing that's interesting about this one is it again has an owner that lives in a nearby condo, but not in the same place here. And we can see this one's a 2-bedroom, 2-bath condo we're looking at, and it doesn't have any of those homestead exemptions, which is why the opening bid amount is such a small percentage of the property's value. Again, this property's value, they say at 487, and is opening up for just 32,000.
Yeah, well, and we've seen some of these that have bid up to 80% of the market value, but we've seen some of these properties in auctions where even in a place like Miami, they're picked up for 40 to 50 cents on the dollar. And if you're picking up one of these condos that are newer built in a nice building, if we can get these for under 50 cents on the dollar, it's usually going to be a pretty good investment. I mean, this is right next to the Marriott, right there on the water. So these are properties that it can make sense to pay a little bit more for than maybe we would on a structured property, because we're only really worrying about the interior of the property.
All right, now it's going to be number A and then 2955. There's a lot of condos there. Look at that. That's crazy. All right. So we did find it though. They have it listed here at 600,000, which is closer to what we've seen with some of the others there. But it's still 100,000 plus over, what it's estimated at there. We don't have any interior images on it though, and it probably in fact, let's look at something real quick here. You see, it's owned here by a corporation, and it looks like it's been owned by them probably since about 2011, is when it was transferred into that. It's been like that ever since.
Yeah, we can see back in 2006, somebody paid 580 for it.
Yeah. In fact, so there are a lot of opportunities. This one it could bid up for a lot. I mean, chances are it will most likely redeem. And somebody's just going to pay off their taxes a little bit late here and avoid foreclosure. But actually, looking at sales history on properties, it's one of the things that we like to go and check, because it can help us identify properties that have been through the tax sale multiple times. And if it has been through the property multiple times, sometimes it can make you wonder what's going on with the property, or why is it constantly going through the tax sale. It can help you identify issues or problems that the property might have.
Yeah, well, and one thing that's nice about Florida is that there's multiple counties that are holding auctions. Some counties hold multiple auctions even every single month. So there's all of these different counties that we can go ahead and bid in. We can go ahead and put a deposit down, which is usually about 5% of what we plan on bidding. And we might even be able, in most of these areas, we can actually even use that deposit in more than one county. So in this case, maybe you're investing in Lake County this month, but Lake County doesn't have an auction next month, so you're going to transfer that deposit over to Polk County and participate in the Polk County sale. And so this gives us the flexibility to invest in a lot of different counties within Florida, and pretty much use the same login and the same deposit from one auction to the next.
Yeah, in fact, let me just click on this one here. We've got a lot of interesting properties in this sale. Really, for there only being 20 properties in it, nearly all of these here are kind of interesting properties. Now, this is one that we've seen before, and I think it's going to go to auction this time, and may actually sell here for the end or for last time. And we can see this one's owned by the church, but the mailing address, property address are not the same. So there's a nearby church here that is probably the owner of the church, but this is the duplex. And in fact, if I pull up the image here, you may recognize, because I think we've seen this property here before, but it has a very low opening bid amount compared to what it's starting for. I mean,
Yeah,
compared to its value.
in fact, last week when we talked about on-site evaluations, this is the property that I used to do an on-site evaluation slide. When we talked about looking at the exterior, looking at the windows, looking at the roof, we actually used this property as the example in last week's podcast.
Yeah, very interesting here. And let's see here. They value it at about $522. So certainly it's starting out for just $15,000. Very low percentage of value that it's starting out. And it has pretty good value. And I'm sure if we were to look, the rent potential on it is probably pretty good. I mean, they're estimated there. I wonder if the 2,300 is both sides there. If they're figuring you're going to get $1,100 or $1,200 a side, that would make sense.
It does have two addresses though.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, that's true. They may just be showing.
I'm not sure if the other address pulls up a separate value or not, but it does have two addresses listed on the county record when we were looking.
Something else that's interesting about the property. I mean, so here's where we can see where it was moved into, the corporate name or into the church's name. It looks like though that they've essentially kind of owned it here for a long time. This sale may not have ever must not have happened. No, this sale, no, they did buy it, right?
Well, no, I think that they were going to sell it to that CY Investments.
Oh,
You
that's
see
right.
where $100, but I don't think that you can see that it says corrective. I'm not sure that it ever actually got transferred to them because it's still in the church's name now. In fact, if you look back at the photo, go back to the map, see that's the church right across the street.
Oh yeah, that makes sense right here. Yeah.
So, I think that's kind of where it, hopefully those aren't graves in the backyard. I can't tell. You got buy a property and right behind your duplex, you've got 4 graves back there.
Yeah, you wouldn't be the first person that's bought a house with some bodies buried on it.
In fact, I was looking at over-the-counter list today for tax deeds, and this over-the-counter list was actually just had a full graveyard on there. Fortunately, there's nothing you can really do with that. It's probably the reason it was obviously privately owned, and they didn't pay the property taxes, and now it's just part of the over-the-counter list.
Yeah, that is pretty interesting. I must have lost here one or two of the properties here.
Well, we've gone through quite a few, and it gives us a good idea of Florida, how Florida works. Easy to use. You can see how we can quickly pull up the records. We can look and see what the opening bid is. Does it have an address? If it doesn't have an address or if it doesn't have a street number, it's most likely going to be land. And we can get a quick bid to value ratio of what is that opening bid versus the property's value.
Yeah, really, we can do it as fast in Florida as we can anywhere, really. And really, I think that out of any of the counties too I've ever seen, the Florida county records are the best. I haven't seen another county, or I haven't been in looking at the records of other states. I've never seen another place that I thought had better records than what we deal with Florida. Their records are always just they're put together pretty well. They're usually very comprehensive, include a lot of simple links to kind of help us go to other things or other tools. They're there. This house we can see is owner occupied. Everything about it is just easy to digest and to go through. I would say that doing due diligence work in Florida is always a pleasure, with the records that you have compared to what you run into in some places. Some counties just don't have the same degree of records that places like Florida will.